When we think of Great Britain, the image of elegant London, red phone booths, the monarchy, and afternoon tea immediately comes to mind. But that's just a postcard, a facade that covers the country's other face. Behind the palace walls and shiny streets hide stories of colonial crimes, poverty and inequality, brutal experiments, crime, and secrets that have been kept hidden for centuries. This isn't a fairy tale about the islands, but rather a story that sometimes feels like a thriller. Today, I'm going to show you the dark side of Great Britain, the side you won't see in tourist brochures. In the 19th century, the British Empire was the biggest power the world had ever seen. It stretched across all continents, controlling about a quarter of the globe and hundreds of millions of people. The British called their empire the land where the sun never sets, because truly, wherever you looked, their flag was flying over colonies. It sounded grand, but the cost of this dominance was terrible. In India, the jewel in the empire's crown, British rule led to a series of terrible famines. During the Great Famine in the 1840s, several million people died. The tragic part is that, at the same time, huge amounts of rice, wheat and other crops were being shipped from India to Great Britain to feed the home country, leaving the local people to suffer. More famines in the second half of the century took the lives of millions more, all in the name of keeping the colonial system going. It wasn't just India that felt the weight of British rule. In Kenya, during the Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s, the British set up a network of internment camps that basically worked like concentration camps. Thousands of Kenyans were brutally tortured there. They were beaten, starved, raped, and many never left those camps alive. Here's an interesting fact that might surprise many of you. For decades, archives in London hid documents describing colonial crimes. It wasn't until the second decade of the 21st century that some of them were revealed, and the world learned what really went on behind the scenes of maintaining the empire. The British government for years followed a policy of darkening history, destroying or hiding evidence of uncomfortable facts. It's also important to remember that the empire's dominance wasn't just about political control. It was also a huge system of economic exploitation. Colonies were forced to produce raw materials and food, which were then sent to Great Britain. The local economies were often destroyed, and millions of people became dependent on working for the empire. This wasn't a civilizing mission as it was often presented, but a brutal system of taking advantage of others. The British Empire is still a source of pride for some in British society. It's remembered as a time of greatness and glory. But its dark side is one of the most unspoken parts of history. Famines, camps, torture, and the removal of goods and natural resources that built the foundation of Great Britain's power. When we think about the UK, we often picture elegant London red double-decker buses, black taxis, the majestic Big Ben, aristocrats in hats, and palaces surrounded by green gardens. But this fancy front hides another world, a world of huge social inequalities that have divided British society for centuries. The British class system goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, and its effects are still felt today. On one side, we have the royal family and aristocrats who inherit fortunes and influence worth billions of pounds. On the other side are everyday people, workers, immigrants, and residents of neglected industrial areas. You only need to go a few miles outside central London to see housing projects, joblessness, and children living below the poverty line. According to reports from charity groups, millions of people in the UK rely on food banks every day. Imagine a country thought to be one of the richest in the world, yet families there have nothing to eat. What's even more shocking is that this problem has gotten worse in recent years, despite new technology and economic growth. An interesting fact that shows how big the inequality is that London is sometimes called the city of two worlds. On one side, you have the most luxurious neighborhoods like Kensington or Chelsea, where apartments cost tens of millions of pounds. On the other side, there are places where people are crammed into crowded public housing and children go to school without breakfast. The British education system and healthcare, which are supposed to create equal chances, often just make the differences even clearer. Kids from rich families go to fancy private schools that open doors to places like Oxford or Cambridge. Meanwhile, kids from working-class families end up in overcrowded public schools, where their chances of moving up in society are very small. This inequality affects daily life. Stats show that life expectancy in the UK can differ by as much as 15 years, depending on whether you live in a wealthy area or a poorer part of town. This means your address can shape your future more than your dreams or talents. So the UK is a country of big differences. The luxury and sparkle of royal events stand next to the struggles of everyday people fighting to get by. This is the dark side, hidden beneath the surface of a modern country still dealing with its own class system. The royal family, Buckingham Palace, grand parades and riches that have fascinated people worldwide for centuries. Millions of tourists come to London every year to see the changing of the guard or peek through the gates of royal homes. It's a symbol of stability and tradition, but behind the glitter of crowns and jewels, there's a darker truth. The royal family is one of the most powerful institutions in the world. Their wealth is estimated at billions of pounds, and a large part of this fortune comes from lands and goods bought during the time of the empire. Few tourists think about the diamonds in Queen Elizabeth's crown, like the famous Koh-i-Noor, which came from India, taken during colonial times. For the British, it's a symbol of greatness, but for many former colonies, it's a wound that still causes anger and demands its return. The monarchy has always cared about its image, perfectly planned photos, speeches, and ceremonies. But the royal family's history is full of scandals they try to hide. Romances, betrayals, family fights, all the things that would be private matters in other families become international headlines here. Princess Diana's death in the 1990s was a turning point. Millions of people worldwide began to openly question the true nature of the monarchy, its coldness and distance from ordinary people. One of the most talked about topics is the royal family's connections with politics and rich elites. Even though the monarch mostly has a symbolic role, in reality the royal family has a lot of influence. Meetings behind closed doors, talks with prime ministers, connections with the world's richest people. All this means the monarchy is still a political player, though in a way that often stays hidden. Something interesting that might surprise many of you is that Queen Elizabeth II was one of the biggest private landowners in the world. She owned properties on several continents, and her wealth was kept secret. What's more, the royal family for years used something called royal prerogative, which was a special right that let them block or change proposed laws in the British Parliament if those laws might hurt the Crown's interests. So the British monarchy is more than just a fairy tale about princesses and princes. It's an institution that for centuries has balanced between tradition and dark secrets. One of the most famous symbols of the British underworld were the Cray twins, Ronnie and Reggie. In the 1960s, they became legends of London's East End. They ran nightclubs where showbiz stars and politicians partied, but at the same time, they ruled the criminal world with an iron fist. Torture, extortion, and murder were everyday occurrences. Officially, they posed as elegant businessmen, but in reality, they instilled fear throughout London. But the Cray twins are just the tip of the iceberg. Modern British gangs are even more brutal and organized. For years, London has been battling the plague of so-called knife gangs. Young people recruited from poorer neighborhoods are drawn into a world of violence, drugs, and feuds. Knife attacks have become so common that the city has earned the dark nickname "Stabbing Capital of Europe." We also can't forget about international connections. Great Britain is one of the most important centers for money laundering in Europe. The city of London, full of luxurious apartments and expensive offices, often becomes a refuge for wealth gained by mafias from Russia, Africa, or Asia. This is another paradox. A global financial and elegance center in the shadows is a machine that hides billions acquired illegally. An interesting fact, not often talked about, is that the Metropolitan Police have been running special units dealing with gangs for years, but in practice this fight is like a game of cat and mouse. The more the system tries to suppress the criminal underworld, the faster it adapts, creating new ways of operating. The British underworld isn't just anonymous criminals. These are networks that wrap around entire cities, from small-time dealers on the streets to elegant businessmen laundering money in luxury skyscrapers. London, the heart of Great Britain, a city that for many is a symbol of wealth, culture, and modernity. Every year, it draws millions of tourists who dream of seeing Big Ben, the London Eye, or Buckingham Palace. But this same London, which shines like gold in tourist brochures, has a dark side, one that it tries to hide from the world every day. You only need to go a few streets from the city center to see a completely different side of the city. Where a tourist might expect elegant townhouses, you can find crowds of homeless people camping under bridges, in subway stations, and in overcrowded hostels. According to charities, thousands of people in London alone don't have a roof over their heads. It's one of the richest cities in the world, yet it's also a place where people sleep on cold concrete, just a few steps from luxury boutiques. The dark side of London is also loneliness. Even though millions of people live in the city, many residents struggle with feeling isolated. Many older Londoners admit that they go days without anyone to talk to. The contrast is striking. In a metropolis full of lights, music, and hustle, hundreds of thousands of people feel completely invisible. A surprising fact is that right in the heart of London, there are entire streets of empty, luxurious apartments bought by foreign billionaires. Apartments worth tens of millions of pounds sit empty for months, while a few streets away, ordinary residents are fighting to survive. This shows a harsh contrast. The London of wealth and the London of poverty exist side by side, but rarely meet. The city that seems full of charm and prestige in tourist ads actually hides the struggles of thousands of people. For decades, Great Britain presented itself as a country of law, democracy, and morality. But behind the official statements are stories that sound like a thriller movie: human experiments, government secrets, and scandals that few dare to speak about openly. As early as the mid-20th century, the British were conducting chemical and biological experiments. For example, in the 1950s and 60s, secret planes spraying substances over cities weren't a conspiracy theory, it was real. Mysterious substances were dropped over towns like Salisbury to see how they spread in the air. People had no idea they were a part of a big experiment, and the health effects were felt for decades. Even darker were the tests conducted on soldiers. At the famous Porton Down facility, which still exists today, hundreds of young recruits were exposed to chemical warfare agents. Many of them reported serious health problems, and some never fully recovered. Officially, they spoke of biological defense research. But the truth was that ordinary people became guinea pigs in the name of science and military advantage. Great Britain also has social scandals that still stir emotions today. One of them was the so-called child migrants. Thousands of young children, mostly from poor families, were sent to Australia or Canada as part of migration programs. Parents were told it was for their own good and the children would get a new chance. In reality, many ended up in orphanages and labor camps where they were exploited and treated as cheap labor. Documents also came to light showing that in the 1990s, pharmaceutical companies, with the approval of state institutions, tested new drugs on children in orphanages. Although today they officially speak of mistakes of the past, for the victims, it was a daily reality full of pain and suffering. An interesting fact, which sounds like a piece from a spy novel, is that in some British archives there are still hundreds of top-secret documents whose release has been postponed for decades. This means that many of the darkest secrets are still waiting to be uncovered. British experiments and scandals show that behind the mask of a stable, proud nation lies a history full of manipulation, suffering, and hidden truths. And it's this dark side that makes the question, what else remains hidden, still relevant. Even though it might seem like brutal colonial practices, human experiments, and gangster fights belong to the distant past, the shadow of these events still hangs over Great Britain. Modern London is a city of skyscrapers and luxury, but it's also one of Europe's capitals of inequality. Behind the shiny fronts of the skyscrapers are neighborhoods where children grow up in poverty, and crime becomes an everyday thing. In recent years, the country has seen a big jump in knife attacks. This is something that has become a sign of youth gangs and a lack of hope for the future. Great Britain hasn't gotten rid of the ghosts of its empire either. Arguments about how to tell its colonial history are popping up again, at monuments, in universities, and in the media. Many people are asking if a country that built its power on the suffering of others for centuries has truly faced up to its past. There are also plenty of modern political scandals, from money troubles in the House of Commons to unclear business connections, and even accusations of spying and secret actions by the services. For many British people, the idea of a clean and honest democracy is starting to look more like a myth than reality. An interesting thing that shows how modern times mix with dark traditions is that even today, some files about government and army actions are kept secret for decades. This means that part of the truth about Great Britain will only be known in the future. The shadows of modern times show that history isn't a closed book. What happened in the past still affects the present, the lives of everyday people, politics, and how the world sees Great Britain. At first glance, Great Britain seems to be all about monarchy, tradition, and elegance, but underneath, it's a country full of contradictions, a tough history, and dark secrets. Colonial legacy, huge inequalities, royal secrets, crime in the heart of London, and government scandals. All of this paints a picture you won't see in tourist ads. And even though it's a country with amazing achievements, culture, and influence on the world, to truly understand it, you have to look not just at its bright sides, but also at the parts that still cast a long shadow. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Take care. Bye for now.